Welcome, sales associates, budding sales professionals, to Property Careers Prospector School, where we show you how to create a market share in your marketplace that gets you in there as a player in the shortest space of time, and then maintain it, ultimately leading to prospect flow. The major thrust of what we teach here is about foothold, about breaking into a market or reinvigorating a market with some degree of permanency. Let's get the hair down up there. And today's session is an interesting one, because what we're going to do is talk about, and it seems to have been high on the agenda with a lot of people today, the context by which you are communicating with potential sellers. And that context is what we believe ought to be done in consultation. Certainly the market is indicating, is showing, and although many of you may think, what the goodness gracious me is he talking about? But it is now indicating that there's going to be some significant change in a macro sense across all markets. I'm seeing it now. This would be the fallout, if you like, on the back of COVID. There's lots of things that we're going to see and change. I'll make you aware of those as they come to hand. But invariably, some things remain fairly constant. And that is that when you are prospecting, the last thing that you want to be doing, and I have mentioned this before, but is trying to compete with other agents on the same platform that they're competing. So the way I explain this is, if they're playing the game a certain way, rather than trying to compete with them on their level, especially if you're a contender trying to break into the market, it's better that you play a different game in its entirety. And by playing that different game, you're not bound to actually compete with other agents on their terms. So I look at this and I say that what do most agents do out there? Well, I think one of the real bugbears that I have with it is they prospect in the context of seeking market appraisals. Now, I'm not saying this doesn't work, and I'm not looking to have a debate with anyone. I get it, that if you're appraising properties, invariably you're going to happen across people that are ready to sell now, or they may want to sell later. And if you build that relationship with them, you are going to list properties. For me, however, I think that it takes an inordinate amount of time, way too much time. It's way too protracted for me. And I would rather be making the connection with people who are actually selling now or imminently, and thereby bringing properties onto the market in a shorter space of time. Now, to my mind, to get this in order, and especially with the change that I am anticipating in the market, yes, that's contingent on a whole range of things, but the reality is the economic fallout that we're seeing on the back of COVID-19 has to adversely affect the real estate markets in any geographic precinct at some stage. So in an anticipative fashion, we know that once that starts to occur, that there's a strong likelihood that most markets will start to become oversupplied. When they're oversupplied, this will drive price down. If you've made the context of your prospecting centric to pricing, it's an argument that you can't win. This is one that I spend a lot of time explaining to real estate professionals, definitely to peak performance professionals, and all the way through to sales team leaders. I'm constantly engaging with them that you need to have your team, your brand focused on offering a product that is more centric to solving the problems of people. How is that problem? How is that challenge articulated to you? Certainly at the prospecting stage, basically by their motive. So I say that those salespeople that are focusing on discussions around the motive, the reasons as to why someone's making a move. Now, it's fairly simplistic. Nobody moves without good reason. Even if a prospective property seller is looking to sell an investment property, that investment property will most likely be linked to some other ongoing motive, and they need to sell that property to either secure the funds to satisfy that other motive, or sometimes just to relieve the debt that's been established around that. Often at times they might even be selling it to because it's now a negative equity, or the investment just isn't performing the right way. So in any event, nobody brings a property to the market and says, we'll figure out what we're going to do after we sell it. They typically, and I know this might not be 100% foolproof for those of you that are the naysayers, but I'm telling you now, in the vast majority of instances, they already know what they're going to do with the proceeds of that sale once it falls into place. And so it is that we say that in prospecting, your first step is to identify sellers, but then not move into that space that I see a lot of agents do, where they just turn around and say to an owner, would you like a market appraisal? Now, if you make your product, again, all about appraising properties or arriving at a value for that property, well, then you're going to have the ramifications of that on your lap. Now, I know that you could deliver favorable news around price and you might promise them the world, but if the market's not going to deliver, all you're doing is securing owners into that space that are overly expectant of what the market has to deliver, but purely around price. Whereas if your discussions are more centric to the motive, to the owner's reasons for selling, well, then you can move in that space onto making your product centric to the solution around their motive. And the way that I explain this to people that are in a prospecting space, you want to focus on the being able to offer advice rather than price. You see, the reality is there is no value in pricing a property, fundamentally, because when you're pricing a property, in any event, we can only really offer that advice in the context of comparatives. We can only offer that advice in, what has recently sold, what is currently on the market, and what we're anticipating coming onto the market, where it's going to go. But when a market becomes rather kinetic, when it starts to go through a change, and I don't want to get into too much detail on this. I already did this at the sales professional level last week, but in Sales Trainer Online. But once it starts to become, and it is quite liquid, but once it starts to become kinetic, it starts to shift, it starts to move, it goes through a period of the doldrums where nobody's really sure what it's going to do. Now, the reality is of real estate sales, that there's some things that remain fairly consistent, irrespective of market conditions, and that is that motives will always crop up. There will always be people that need to move. It could be related to a change in relationship status. There's a divorce that's imminent. It could be around financial conditions change. People lose jobs, loans become hard to service, that sort of thing. Deaths in families, so deceased estates and the like. People wanting to take advantage of the move, or their families expanding, job transfers, and the list goes on. So there's still those motives that come into play. This, of course, means that the motive is strong. I'm not saying that owners are ready to sort of concede that to you and tell you exactly what's going on. But if you position yourself in that space as somebody who is offering advice rather than price, well, advice isn't argumentative, it's more educational. And to my mind, this has extreme value, especially if you're clever in your discussions of raising points, even though they might be a bit confronting at first, but then providing the answers to those contentious issues as they might come to hand. So for me, it's about focusing on active property sellers, those that are looking like their motive is strong enough that should they be able to ascertain that the value of their property is greater than or equal to the amount of money they need to fulfill that motive, then they're going to engage agents. And as long as you are able to identify that, you can actually push them into abeyance, be offering them some advice around value. When they become receptive to the presentation, you come on in there And given that you have represented value all the way, rather than getting into the debate around price, which is subjective, it's just a matter of opinion. Most of the time, your opinion, especially if you want to err on the side of being realistic, is most likely not going to augur in favorably with owners, because owners are naturally optimistic. Property sellers are actually optimistic on what the market might give them in the initial stages. We want to entertain that optimism. I just reckon it's a debate you want to avoid altogether. So I say it doesn't matter whether you're a welcome home or you're making follow-up calls or simply dealing with people that I've identified as active property sellers. Now, what we want to do is, once you identify them, yes, top of the mind, you want to secure an opportunity to present a listing presentation. I wish it was called a listing education, but we won't go into that today. That's not the context of what we're talking about. But, you know, we just want to stay away from this idea of coming down to look at their property just to throw our hat into the ring around comparative value. To my mind, that's an argument that you can't win. And most likely, if they're doing their research and you've bumped them at this stage, so if they're checking out an open for inspection that's close to proximity to their property, or they're calling up off a sign, or calling off the internet or otherwise, you know, they're just grabbing that information, they're garnishing that information so that they can run their own comparative market analysis. This doesn't mean that I wouldn't give them advice. It doesn't mean that I wouldn't send them a CMA. It just means that I don't wish to engage in an argumentative fashion around a subjective matter, which really at the end of the day holds no weight, because market value is what they're going to receive, and market value is only determined by taking the property to market, and we want to be selected favorably as the agent that takes that property to market. Now, you might have also suffered the frustration once you identify someone that they then turn around and they'll say, look, we are only looking to put our property on the market if we can find something to buy. Or you might contact them and they might say, we've already had agents down, they've run appraisals, we know that our property will sell. This is a frustrating statement for a real estate agent, because whilst I concede that a property is easy to find a buyer for, it's easy to sell, what happens with that buyer, what terms and conditions are negotiated favorably or unfavorably with that buyer, is the large contentious issue that most sellers unfortunately overlook. So, you know, there are certain opportunities that have to be secured once you've identified, but you need to be, and these are the things I need you to write down. Once you've identified a seller, do not move into the space of saying that horrible thing, can we come down and give you an idea on price? Rather, the next question that should come out of your mouth is, where are you off to? Or even better, what is it that you're trying to do? You know, assuming that you get your property sold, where are you now? So what is it that you're trying to do? Where is the move taking you to? These sort of questions are the ones that make more sense. And the prospecting job has been done in qualifying these open home attendees. So we have people coming to open homes, we have people inquiring, and we're sort of qualified them as, yes, they might be buyers, but at the same time, you know, we now know that they're selling. We've got to then move them from identification process point across to listings, and it's active property sellers that we're looking for. Now, for some of you might move into the space that once they start saying, well, we only want to have someone down once we find something to buy, or we're desperately looking for something to buy. I've even heard salespeople think that they're doing the right thing by engaging a whole lot of conversation about a property that they're looking for that's not available at the moment. And I see salespeople do this all the time. You're engaging in conversation about a property that they want to buy that you don't have listed. That is not the right way to go. So what we need to do is give advice. We need to gently give them confidence to give us the information that we need. Now, I'm not saying at this stage for some of you, if you're relatively new to the real estate industry and new to the game, don't get over the top in trying to secure all this information straight off the cuff. What I would be saying to you is start to learn these skills, and as you become better at them, whenever in doubt, if you've identified someone that is a seller and it's looking fairly ominous, do not be shy to go and grab the advice of a sales team leader in the first instance, or maybe if you're working one-on-one in support to a sales professional, go and get them to intervene and maybe talk to the people, further qualify them, and you could find yourself down at the property sooner rather than later. But these are skills that I want you to start to embrace and then take on board and start thinking more than anything about all of the angles that open up conversation, give you the opportunity to offer real advice, solid advice to property sellers, thereby having offered them something of value. You move through that space of identifying them, making it motive centric, offering them advice, which is of value rather than price, thereby securing the opportunity to run a listing presentation, and then hopefully securing the opportunity to sell that property by way of listing. So the resistance to the presentation is usually, there's a lot of resistance because we make it about price. And if you look at it from their perspective, one of the things I'm constantly saying to salespeople is you need to see yourself the way others see you. You want to catch the hunted, you must think like the prey. So if we want to capture active property sellers, if we want to have the opportunity to present to them, we have to see ourselves the way that they're seeing us. So if we're looking like, you want me to come down to give you an idea of price, you need to get the property on the market, do you have to sell before you buy? These are interrogative things that are just quite off-putting to someone, especially if they're at the stage where they're researching the market, trying to garnish information that allows them to have the confidence to know that the amount of money that they'll receive from the property allows them to fulfill the motive. So I get it, but even so, and that dialogue, if all you're offering to do is offer to come down and do market appraisals, this will secure market appraisals, but it won't necessarily secure listings, represents a whole lot of work for very little reward. I say this to you simply, in your service area, do you believe this month there are enough properties that will list? And if they all listed with you, would that be fabulous? And if the answer to that is obviously yes. So there are more properties than you need coming to market in your service area this month. So shouldn't you be looking at a approach prospecting wise that connects you with those sellers, because that's going to drastically increase the chances of you listing properties. So as I say, don't get frustrated, get fascinated. Why? Well, frustration is another word for quitting. When you become frustrated, you kind of give up. So if you've got what you're identifying as active property sellers resisting for you to get down there and do listing presentations, don't get frustrated, get fascinated, and look at the angle of attack on an entirely different level. Understand that you have to entice them to move further into the space of getting advice, and focus on the overall move. So I know it can often take longer to find a buyer for a property than it takes for an owner to find a home, but they're not to know that. They think their home is their palace. They believe when they put it to market, someone will see what all the things that they saw when they secured the property, and it should sell fairly readily. Now, whilst this can be true, that could also cost them a lot of money in that they sell the property quickly and undersell it. So time is their friend. This needs to be explained to them, and understand this. It is just an educational process. So rather than becoming frustrated with a potential customer or client, if they're making decisions based upon a lack of information, I don't get frustrated. I just get fascinated. And in my own mind, I say to myself, hang on, they don't know what they don't know yet. And I invest the time to educate them around the issues that they may not have considered. And this will then make it easier for me to bring them on board. So I look at it and I go, why on earth would someone want to find and buy a home before selling their house? Why on earth would they want to do that? it could only be naivety. Makes little difference to me that somebody said to them, you can borrow money in a bridging finance arrangement to go ahead and buy and secure the property that you want to make your new home before selling. But of course, this is advice that's given to them by banks, and banks sell money. So of course, they're motivated to get these people that can do it into that position because it's quite profitable for them. But I look at it and I say the risks associated with buying before selling far outweigh any positive aspect of finding a place to buy first. So there's a number of arguments that reason as to why it's better to list before looking. It's better to engage a professional agent that gives you good advice, that shows you a framework that can completely alleviate the risks, or at best minimize the risks, especially financially. But financial risk is completely linked to personal stress. So if you put yourself in an adverse financial situation, that's going to come out by creating personal stress, and people don't want to invite a stressful environment into their lifestyle. So I show them that that's the risk they're taking. So the number of arguments that basically reason as to why it's better to list before looking. Having these documented makes for easy reference and may indeed trigger creativity and more effective dialogue. So the risk of being overly thorough, what I want to do is just go through you with here quickly some things to start you thinking about it, and then I will send to you, those of you that are interested, a whole lot of everything that I'm going to talk about, of points that you can bring into your dialogue. So the first thing I say is, in appointment dialogue, you must take the consultative approach. Stay away from that sales line, which I've said before. Would you like me to come down and give you an idea on price? Because to my mind, they're not receptive to presentations when they're in the research phase. They will become that way. But if you've positioned yourself as offering and giving lots of good advice first, then things are going to make much more sense. So the first question, once you've identified an active property seller, is say to them, what or where are you trying to go or do? Where are you off to? Or what is it that you're trying to do? You can articulate this whatever way feels most comfortable, sits well with you. To me, I say, so where's the move taking you to? And if they say, oh, well, we don't know yet, so look, to me, that's immaterial. I mean, surely the focus is, even if I sold your property for a price that's way above what you expected, if you can't do what you want to do on the other end, you're not going to do it, are you? No. So why don't you tell me what it is that you're trying to do? I'll talk to you in that context, and let's figure out a game plan that allows you to do that represents the least amount of financial risk. So for me, I say, would you like me to show you not only how to sell, but to increase your chances of getting a better than expected result? What do you mean? Well, what if the result that you get is better than you expected? Doesn't that change a whole lot of things? You see, comparative value is not much more than a benchmark. It's not much more than basically a history lesson. It shows you what's going on. And at the moment, the market is quite liquid, and we could exploit, if we find the right buyer, get a better result than maybe even you've anticipated. There's a whole host of variables. Some of them were beyond our control, but importantly, there's some very significant ones that are well and truly within the realms of our control. And the first thing I want to say to you is that listing is not selling. One of the mistakes that property owners make is they assume that if they list the property and we find a buyer, there's an obligation for them to sell. This simply is not true. You see, there's 4 steps that need to be taken that move you into the space that represent the least amount of financial risk. And what do you think the first one is? Now, most sellers will turn around and say to me, well, I've got to find something to buy. So isn't that funny? That's the second step of 4 positive steps that you need to make. But in a way, you're already saying to yourself, you need to buy something before you sell. They go, yeah. Well, that's the first half. Yeah. Sorry. Buying another home is the is the first half of the last step. which you need to do. And the other half of that is selling the house. You want to do them both simultaneously if you can. So if I put this in the context, the 4 positive steps to selling are finding a buyer, finding someone who will buy this property from you, hopefully at a number that makes sense. The second step is for you to find a house that you want to buy. The third step is to match those 2 prices. I'm certain that in your mind, you have a changeover figure that you're looking at to make that move. They go, yeah. Okay, so until we get a buyer and we negotiate them to the best price, we don't know what that's going to be. Now, that could be favorable, it could be better than we'd hoped for, or it might be a little bit tighter than we want to. Certainly, we don't want to be making an offer on the property that you want to make your home without knowing what we've got this end if we've got a changeover budget. So there's 4 steps of what we want to put into play. Find a buyer, find a house, match the prices, buy a home and sell the house. Now, if there's a breakdown at any point, if we find you a buyer and you can't find a house, your concern is, well, what if I go ahead and sell? Who said we're going to sell? I can openly say to the buyer, thanks for your offer. That all makes sense at this point in time, but our owners haven't been able to secure something the other end. So the only choices that buyer then has is to either wait or go off and look at something else, but there'll always be another buyer if we need to find them. But at least from your point of view, if you have found something, if we can match the prices, you can then go ahead and sell this house and buy the new home confidently in a stress-free fashion. Because this is what I'm going to say to you. You're out there looking, you're saying you want to buy a home. What if you find something? What if you do? What are you going to do? And surely you might go, well, I'll go ahead and buy it. But if you go ahead and buy it, don't you own 2 properties at the same time? They go, oh, no, well, then I'd have to put mine on the market, contingent on it selling, then I could go ahead and buy the other. Yeah, but what if there's other buyers that are just like you and some of them are at the ready? They're ready to go ahead with their offer and buy now. Their offer is going to be looked at more favorably than yours, isn't it? Now, this starts to make sense. And they go, well, hang on, they hit you with this what if. Well, what if you find a buyer for ours and we haven't found something to buy? And I say, okay, that's fair enough. Then I just engage the art of paradox. I say, what if you find something to buy and we have found a buyer? Or what if we find a buyer and you do find something to buy? So rather than looking at it negatively, why can't we look at it positively? And if it is negative, if you haven't found something, I could just call all bets off. Stop trying to do my job for me. If we find you a buyer, and I'll say this again, and you haven't found something to buy, I just simply say to that buyer, either wait or thanks, but no thanks. But you're never under any pressure. In any event, I'm the person that does that as your representative, and I won't put you into a financial vice unless you instruct me to do so. But none of this starts without you getting your property to market. The risk versus the return. And I say, look, the risk of actually buying before selling is so much more dangerous than the risk associated with finding a buyer. And if you don't find something, so what? There's no financial risk. Yes, it's a bit of disappointment, but it's not the same as the stress environment that you're going to be inviting in. I also say that you're actually creating timing restrictions, whether you realize this or not. The moment you find something to buy and then you put your property on the market, whether or not you go ahead and buy that property, in any event, you're actually now putting yourself on the clock. Once you're on the clock and you have to sell your property, you are now vulnerable to concessions that you otherwise may not have been. So suddenly you're actually letting the property go for less. Again, I bring up that point of competing buyers. So there's going to be other buyers, and if you find something, if you like it, there might be other buyers that like it, and now you're actually on that property in a less favorable light. What if the offer that you make is based on what you think you're going to get, you don't get it? Or worse, what if the offer you make could have been higher had you have got a better sales price? You see, if we get your property on and we find you a buyer and you get a great price, you could have, if you get a better than expected price, more buying power. Now you can actually look at a property that's better than the one you thought. You see, what you need to understand is I'm okay with no. If we engage this process properly, if we explore the possibilities and the solution is not favorable, I'm okay with you saying to me, no, I can't sell it yet because I haven't found it. And so too will be the buyer. And you can show loads. What you need to do is talk to maybe your sales team leader and see if there are similar case studies, because I can assure you there are plenty of examples of people that went ahead and bought a property before actually listing their property and having theirs for sale that ended up in a financial vice. And that's the example you want to give to them of the risk they're taking by going out there and trying to find something without even so much as having their property listed or up on offer. And then it's just fairly simple, so if we start to move into this space, I'll send you some literature on this. Those of you that are interested, love your feedback on it. Please listen to this a couple of times, but don't get frustrated when somebody says, when you identify an active property seller, don't get anxious about suddenly needing to get down there and give them advice on price and try to give them the push on to get onto the market. Just remain calm. Understand that that's perfectly natural. Congratulate them on making the move. Don't belittle them on the fact that they want to find something to buy before selling. Just make them aware of the pitfalls and the risks. Move into that consultative disposition by offering good, solid real estate advice rather than price. My name's Mark Dwyer. You can reach me at Mark with a K at propertycareers.com.au or my mobile +61 410 592 165. And I look forward to talking to you next week as we build your skills in and around Pröspector School via the Property Careers platform. Thanks for joining us.